In a vast, glittering hall filled with representatives from dozens of alien species, Jared Sinclair stood out, but not in a good way. He was human, and in the Galactic Council, humans were still a joke. Most of the other races had powers beyond imagination, with ancient histories and technological wonders that dwarfed anything Earth had ever achieved. And yet, here Jared was, standing in front of them, barely more than a speck in a room full of giants. The council had convened to hear the will of King Zorath, the ruler of the distant planet Zorathia, who had recently passed away. The king was known throughout the galaxy for his immense wealth and influence, with connections that spanned star systems. So, when his will was read aloud, it shocked everyone. I, King Zorath, hereby leave all of my wealth, my kingdom, and my daughter, Princess Zorath, to Jared Sinclair of Earth. The room fell silent for a moment. Then the laughter began. It started quietly but grew louder as the weight of the situation sank in. Earth, a human inheriting the kingdom of Zorathia. One of the council members, a towering reptilian creature, chuckled. This is a joke, right? Another alien, a silver-skinned being with 4 arms, grinned wickedly. Who is this Jared Sinclair? Is he the best Earth has to offer? This is a mockery. Jared stood there, trying to keep his face neutral, though his heart was pounding. He hadn't asked for any of this. He was just an average human, living on Earth, when suddenly he was thrust into the center of galactic attention. The next part of the will only added to the ridicule. As for my daughter, Princess Zorath, she is to be cared for and protected by Jared Sinclair. She has my deepest trust, though she may not be easy to look at. But that is my final wish. The laughter erupted again, even louder this time. The princess, the ugly daughter as the council now called her, was not known for her beauty. She was, in fact, infamous throughout the galaxy for her appearance and awkward demeanor. It wasn't just her looks that made her an outcast. Her reputation for being difficult and socially awkward had made her a subject of ridicule, even among her own people. The idea that Jared would inherit such a responsibility seemed almost too absurd to be true. Jared took a deep breath, trying to ignore the sneers and mocking remarks around him. He didn't know why King Zorath had chosen him. He had never met the king, nor did he have any connection to Zorathia. All he knew was that he was now the ruler of an alien world, a place he had never even heard of before, and the guardian of a princess no one wanted. The council continued their laughter, but Jared's mind was already elsewhere. He wasn't sure how he was going to handle this, but one thing was certain. If the galaxy thought a human couldn't handle this, they were about to be proven very wrong. Jared Sinclair's first few days on Zorathia were a blur of confusion and disbelief. He had been told to report to the royal palace immediately after the reading of the will, but nothing could have prepared him for what he found there. The planet Zorathia was beautiful in its own strange way. Towering crystal spires stretched up into a sky filled with multiple moons, and the air smelled of a fresh, sweet scent that Jared had never experienced before. Yet, no matter how stunning the surroundings were, Jared couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong. The royal palace, too, was massive. The hallways were lined with ancient statues and tapestries that seemed to depict scenes of battles and royal events from a time long past. But as Jared walked deeper into the palace, he noticed the strange silence. The staff of the palace, servants, advisors, and guards, all looked at him with a mix of surprise and disdain. Jared finally arrived at the throne room, where he was to meet Princess Zorath. When he entered, he found the princess sitting on a golden throne, surrounded by a few palace advisors. At first glance, she didn't seem like the kind of person who could rule a kingdom. Her appearance was nothing like the regal leaders Jared had imagined. She was tall, with pale skin and tangled black hair that seemed to grow in every direction. Her eyes, a deep purple, were large but distant, as if she were lost in her own world. She didn't speak when Jared entered, only looked at him with an emotionless stare. The advisors, however, seemed eager to give their opinion. "So, you're the human inheriting everything," one of them muttered under his breath. "You're here to take care of her, then?" Jared didn't answer right away. He had expected the mockery to continue, but he wasn't prepared for how cold it felt in the room. It was as though everyone in the palace had given up on the princess long ago, as if she were already a lost cause. He walked up to her slowly, unsure of what to say. "Princess Zoreth," Jared said, his voice tentative. Before he could finish, she cut him off. "You're not here to talk, human. You're here to take care of me," she said flatly. Her voice had no warmth, no hint of kindness or anger. It was just neutral. Jared blinked. "Take care of you." She nodded. "Yes." The will was clear. "You must protect me. You are now my guardian." Jared didn't know what to say. He had never signed up for this. He hadn't even met Zoreth before. Yet here he was, the one responsible for this princess who had been rejected by everyone, even her own people. One of the advisors stepped forward, clearly frustrated. "Princess, your father may have been the king, but the will is ridiculous. This human cannot be trusted with this responsibility. He is a fool who knows nothing of our ways." Jared's fists clenched at the insult, but before he could respond, Zoreth spoke again. "Leave us," she said coldly. The advisor faltered, clearly surprised by her sudden command. But he didn't argue. He bowed his head and exited the room, leaving only Jared and the princess. Jared turned back to Zoreth. "I'm not going to abandon you," he said quietly. "I don't know what's going on here, but I will try to do what's right." Zoreth finally looked up at him, her purple eyes staring into his, with an intensity that was almost unsettling. "Try," she whispered. "That is all anyone ever does." Days turned into weeks, and Jared's life on Zorathia didn't get any easier. As he spent more time with Princess Zoreth, he learned that she was even more difficult than the council had let on. She rarely left the palace, and when she did, it was always in complete silence. The princess didn't smile, didn't laugh, and didn't speak much at all. The only time she seemed alive was when she was reading old books or studying strange symbols in ancient texts that no one else could understand. One day, while Jared was looking for Zoreth in the royal archives, he came across an old dusty tome that seemed different from the others. It was hidden behind a stack of books no one had touched in centuries. The cover was made of some dark material that shimmered when the light hit it, and the pages were old and yellowed. There was something about it that caught his attention. Curious, Jared opened the book, hoping to find something useful. As he flipped through the pages, he found what seemed to be a history of Zorathia's royal family. It wasn't like any history he had seen before. The pages told stories of ancient powers, royal bloodlines that could shape reality itself, and a long-lost artifact that was said to have been passed down from generation to generation. As he read, Jared felt a strange sense of urgency. This wasn't just some fairy tale or legend. There was something real about this power. He was just beginning to understand what it meant when he heard the soft sound of footsteps behind him. Turning around, he saw Zoreth standing in the doorway, watching him quietly. For the first time since he had met her, her expression wasn't blank. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, or maybe even interest. "Do you understand it?" she asked, her voice soft, but filled with a strange kind of intensity. Jared hesitated for a moment. "It's about your family's history, the royal bloodline, and this power that your ancestors had." Zoreth stepped closer, her eyes never leaving the book in his hands. "I know about it," she said slowly. "It's been forgotten, hidden away. My father kept it from everyone, including me. He was afraid of what would happen if anyone knew the truth." Jared frowned. "What truth?" Zoreth's eyes darkened. "The artifact," she said quietly. "The one that gives the royal family the power to change reality itself." Jared's mind raced. He had heard about the artifact in the book, but he hadn't understood what it really meant. Now, it was starting to make sense. If the artifact really existed, it could be the key to everything, to saving Zorethia, to defeating the forces who mocked him, and even to changing the entire galaxy. But why had Zoreth's father hidden it away? Why had he left it for Zoreth to discover? Zoreth's voice broke through his thoughts. My father didn't trust anyone with it, not even me. But you might be different. Jared was about to ask what she meant when a loud crash echoed through the palace, the sound of metal against stone. Both of them froze, their hearts racing. Something was wrong. We need to leave, Zoreth said, her voice steady but urgent. Now. Jared grabbed her arm, and without a word, they rushed out of the room. The palace was under attack. The sound of the explosion still echoed through the palace corridors as Jared and Zoreth rushed down the hall. The once peaceful palace was now filled with chaos. Guards rushed past them, weapons drawn, shouting orders. Jared had no idea who was attacking, but he knew one thing. They were here for Zoreth. Who's coming for us? Jared asked, his voice tight with fear. Zoreth's eyes were wide, but she didn't panic. The council. They must have sent someone to stop us from finding the artifact. Jared's mind raced. He had only just started to understand the gravity of the situation, but now it was clear. The Galactic Council feared the artifact, and they would do anything to keep it hidden. They couldn't let Zoreth discover her true power. We need to get out of here, Jared said, grabbing Zoreth's arm and pulling her toward the nearest exit. But before they could reach the doors, a figure stepped out from behind a pillar. A tall, broad-shouldered man with pale blue skin and silver eyes. He wore the uniform of a military officer, but there was something about him that made Jared's heart skip. The man wasn't an enemy. He was an ally. Hold on, the man said, raising a hand to stop them. You're not going anywhere without me. Jared stepped in front of Zoreth instinctively. Who are you? He demanded. My name is Kale, the man replied, his tone calm despite the chaos around them. I was once a member of the Galactic Council's elite forces, but I've seen enough. I'm here to help you. Zoreth glanced at Jared, her expression unreadable. How can we trust him? Kale gave her a hard look. You don't have to trust me yet, but you don't have much of a choice. The palace is being surrounded. If you stay, they'll kill you both. Jared hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll trust you. Without another word, Kale led them through a secret passage hidden behind a set of ancient tapestries. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper into the palace's underbelly. It was a labyrinth of hallways, dimly lit and filled with the scent of dust and forgotten time. They moved quickly, trying to stay out of sight. As they made their way through the winding tunnels, Kale explained, I wasn't always a soldier for the council. When I first joined, I believed in their mission. But over time, I realized the truth. They don't care about peace. They only care about control. The artifact, it could change everything. That's why they want it so badly. Jared listened, absorbing the new information. It made sense. The Galactic Council had always seemed more interested in power than in the well-being of the galaxy's inhabitants. But the idea of the artifact, a power that could reshape reality itself, was something he could barely comprehend. Zoreth spoke up, her voice low. What exactly does it do? This artifact. Kale stopped walking for a moment and turned to them, his face serious. The artifact allows the holder to alter reality. Time, space, even the laws of physics themselves can be rewritten. It's not just a weapon. It's the key to controlling everything. Whoever holds it controls the galaxy. Jared stared at Kale, his mind spinning. If the council knew about the artifact and what it could do, it was no wonder they were willing to destroy anyone who got too close to it. Suddenly, the walls of the passage shook with another explosion. They could hear shouting and the sounds of blaster fire in the distance. We don't have much time, Kale said. We need to get off this planet. Zoreth's eyes flickered with something new. Determination. She wasn't the same princess Jared had first met. She was starting to realize her own strength. "Let's go," she said firmly. And with that, the three of them ran deeper into the dark tunnels, ready to face whatever came next. The underground passage grew darker with each step they took, the only light coming from the faint glow of their emergency flashlights. Jared could hear the distant sounds of chaos echoing from above. Blaster fire, shouting, and the hum of engines. The palace was under full assault. Whoever was behind the attack was serious about getting to Zoreth, and now they were running out of time. Kale led the way, his movements quick and confident as he navigated the maze of tunnels. Jared and Zoreth followed closely behind, neither of them speaking. The weight of their situation was heavy. If they didn't escape soon, the artifact and everything they knew would be lost. "We're almost there," Kale muttered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the palace's destruction. "Where are we going?" Jared asked, his mind racing. He didn't like the idea of running, but he knew it was their best chance. Kale didn't answer immediately. His eyes were scanning the tunnels ahead, his mind calculating their route. "There's an old hangar," he said finally. "It's out of the palace's reach. We'll take a ship and get off-world before the council can send more forces." Zoreth's voice broke the silence. "How do we know we can trust you?" Kale slowed down just enough to look over his shoulder. His expression was unreadable. "You don't. But you don't have much of a choice right now." Jared was about to respond when a loud explosion shook the tunnel walls. They all froze, the sound of crumbling stone filling the air. The ground beneath them trembled as if the very foundation of the palace was shaking apart. "Move," Kale shouted, urgency in his voice. They ran faster now, the air thick with dust and the stench of burning metal. The wall seemed to close in on them as the explosions continued to rock the palace above. Jared's heart was pounding in his chest, and he could hear Zoreth's breath quicken as they pushed forward. The tunnel finally began to widen, and Jared could see a faint light ahead. It was the exit Cal had promised. But just as they reached the end, a series of sharp mechanical noises filled the air. A low growl echoed from the shadows. "Get ready," Cal warned. Jared's eyes darted around. The tunnel was empty, but something didn't feel right. Before he could react, a group of heavily armored soldiers appeared at the entrance. They were clad in dark armor, their faces hidden behind helmets, and they were armed to the teeth. "Council soldiers," Kale hissed under his breath. "They're here." Zoreth stepped in front of Jared instinctively. "We can't let them stop us," she said, her voice steady. For the first time, Jared saw a flicker of the power her father had spoken of. Kale didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he drew a blaster from his belt and fired. The first soldier went down in a flash of blue light. But there were more. A lot more. "We need to move," Kale shouted. "Go, I'll cover you." Jared didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed Zoreth's arm and ran toward the hangar, his legs burning from the effort. Behind them, blaster fire filled the air, but Cal's shots kept the soldiers at bay for the moment. They reached the hangar door, and Jared slapped the emergency controls, hoping the door would open. It slid open slowly, revealing a small transport ship inside. The engines were already running, its lights flashing in the dim hangar. Cal's voice came through the comms, urgent. "Hurry. I'm not going to be able to hold them off for much longer." With one last glance at the oncoming soldiers, Jared pushed Zoreth ahead. "Get in the ship now." The door was just wide enough for them to squeeze inside, and Jared barely had time to get seated before Kale burst in, sliding into the cockpit. The hangar door began to close, but not fast enough. As it began to shut, Jared saw the soldiers charging toward them. "Hold on," Kale shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The ship shot out of the hangar and into the sky, leaving the palace and the galaxy's most powerful forces behind. As they broke free of the planet's atmosphere, Jared let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Zoreth was quiet beside him, but there was a fire in her eyes now, a fire that wasn't there before. She was starting to believe what Jared already knew. They could fight back. And with Cal's help, they were ready to take on the galaxy. The small transport ship sped through the stars, leaving the planet Zorathea far behind. The stars outside were blurry streaks of light as the ship's engines hummed in the quiet of space. Inside, the tension was palpable. Jared sat beside Zorath, his eyes scanning the dark space beyond the ship's windows, trying to calm his racing thoughts. They had escaped the palace, but that was only the beginning of their journey. The Galactic Council would stop at nothing to track them down. Cal was at the helm, his eyes locked on the star map displayed in front of him. His face was hard, but Jared could tell he was thinking, planning their next move. "Where are we going?" Jared asked, breaking the silence. His voice was hoarse from the adrenaline, still pumping through his veins. Cal glanced over at him, his lips set in a grim line. "We need to go somewhere off the radar. A place the Council doesn't control. There's an old smuggler's base on the edge of the galaxy. It's hidden, but we should be able to get there without being detected." Zorath, who had been silent since the escape, finally spoke. "And then what? What's our plan after that?" Cal's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. "We regroup, find allies, and figure out how to use the artifact. The Council won't stop until they have it, and we'll need a strategy to deal with them." Jared shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The weight of their situation was starting to sink in. They had escaped one battle, but a bigger war was coming. A war for the artifact, and for control of the galaxy itself. Zorath's voice was quiet, but it held an edge of determination. "We'll need more than just a plan. We'll need an army." Cal nodded slowly, his fingers tapping on the console in front of him. "You're right. We're going to need help. But first, we need to figure out where the artifact is. If we don't find it before the Council does, everything we're fighting for will be lost." Jared turned to look at Zorath, who had her eyes closed, deep in thought. She had always been the princess, a figurehead to her people. But now she was something more. She was their hope. Jared could see it in her eyes. She knew what she had to do, and she wasn't afraid of the challenges ahead. The ship flew in silence for several hours, the only sounds being the hum of the engines and the occasional beep of the ship's systems. But as they approached the edge of the galaxy, things started to go wrong. The ship's alarm system suddenly blared to life, a shrill warning echoing through the cabin. "What's happening?" Jared asked, his heart jumping into his throat. "Someone's tracking us," Cal said sharply. "We've been spotted." Zorath's face paled. "The Council." "Could be," Cal replied, his fingers flying across the controls as he tried to outrun the pursuing ship. "But whoever it is, we're not getting away without a fight." Jared clenched his fists, adrenaline surging through him again. They had barely escaped once, but now they were being hunted, and there was nowhere to hide. "Cal, what do we do?" Jared asked, his voice steadied despite the rising panic. Cal's eyes narrowed, his expression dark. "We fight. We're not going to let them take us without a struggle." Suddenly, the ship jolted as blaster fire hit the side. The impact sent Jared flying into the side of the cabin, but he quickly regained his balance. The pursuit was close, and they were fast approaching the unknown enemy. "Hold on," Cal shouted, pulling the ship into a sharp dive. The stars outside twisted into a blur as the ship descended toward an asteroid field. The enemy ship followed, but its movements were slower, more cautious. Jared knew that they needed to lose their pursuers. The asteroid field was their only chance to shake them off. As the ship dodged and weaved through the rocks, Jared could hear the roar of the enemy ship's engines behind them, growing louder. Zorath was gripping the seat next to Jared, her eyes wide but focused. "We can't keep this up forever," she said, her voice tight. Cal's lips twisted into a grim smile. "We don't need to. We just need to survive long enough to get to the smuggler base." The ship rocketed through the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding collision after collision. Jared's heart was in his throat, but he didn't take his eyes off the enemy ship. The battle for survival had begun, and no one knew who would come out on top. The asteroid field was a chaotic blur of sharp rocks and deadly obstacles. Jared's heart pounded in his chest as the ship veered and dodged through the deadly maze. Behind them, the enemy ship was relentless, matching every twist and turn in the field. Kel's face was set in concentration, his hands gripping the controls as he fought to stay ahead. "We need to lose them," Kel said through gritted teeth, his eyes flicking between the asteroid field and the ship's instruments. "They're too close." Zoreth gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles white. She had always been a princess, sheltered from the dangers of the galaxy. But now, with her life on the line, she felt a surge of power inside her, a power that was starting to grow as she realized the importance of the artifact. "We can't keep running forever," Zoreth said, her voice steady but determined. Jared looked over at her. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "We fight. We can't let them capture us. We have the artifact's power on our side." Kale looked over at her, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. "You're right. If we don't stop them now, they'll keep coming. We need to take the fight to them." Jared's pulse quickened. He had never been one for battles, but now, with everything at stake, there was no choice. They couldn't run anymore. They had to make a stand. "Kale," Jared said, "what's the plan?" Cal's eyes never left the controls as he spoke. "There's a hidden weapons system on this ship. I've been saving it for emergencies. It's time to use it." The ship rocked again as the enemy ship fired another round of blaster shots. This time, one of the blasts hit the side of the ship, sending a shudder through the hull. The warning lights flashed, and the alarms blared. They were running out of time. "Get ready," Kale shouted, and the ship suddenly veered sharply to the left, causing the pursuing ship to overshoot. Jared didn't wait for an invitation. He rushed to the weapons console and activated the hidden system. In an instant, the ship was armed with powerful laser cannons, enough to destroy anything in their path. Zoreth's voice came through the comms. "We can't just destroy them. We need to capture them and learn who's behind this." Kale nodded. "Agreed. We'll disable their engines, then board them." Jared's hands were shaking as he targeted the enemy ship. He could see it through the view screen, gaining on them once more. With a deep breath, he fired. The laser shot hit the enemy ship's engine, causing it to explode in a burst of flames. The pursuing ship veered wildly, struggling to maintain control. The sudden explosion left a trail of debris in its wake. Kale quickly maneuvered their ship around the wreckage and closed the distance. The enemy ship was disabled but still intact. "Boarding," Kale said, his voice urgent. Jared didn't hesitate. He grabbed a blaster and followed Kale and Zoreth to the airlock. The door opened with a hiss, and they were on the enemy ship. The interior was dark, but they could hear the sound of boots hitting the metal floor. The enemy soldiers were regrouping, ready to defend their ship. "We can't let them escape," Zoreth said, her voice cold with resolve. Kale led the charge, his blaster firing as they moved forward. Jared and Zoreth followed closely, each of them determined to end this fight once and for all. The battle was fierce, but with Cal's experience and their newfound determination, they quickly overpowered the enemy. After what felt like an eternity, the last soldier fell. The ship was theirs. Panting from the fight, Jared looked at Zoreth. Her face was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes. She had proven herself, no longer just a princess, but a leader. Kale stood next to her, his face grim but satisfied. "It's over for them," he said, looking out at the debris of the destroyed enemy ship. Jared let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The fight had been long, but they had won. For now, at least. Zoreth turned to them, her voice filled with resolve. "We've taken the first step. The artifact is ours, and with it, we'll change the galaxy. The Council will never control us again." Jared nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They had survived against impossible odds, and now they had the power to change everything. Together, they stood, united by a common cause, ready to face whatever challenges the galaxy would throw at them next.